again, and welcome back to Witchcraft and Voodoo. I'm Sable and Wiccan priestess, and I'm here with my co-host, Lilith Dorsey, Voodoo priestess. Hello, and happy Independence Day to you.
Thank you. We're celebrating the Second Civil War over here, so it's a bit fun.
Oh my God, I've been laughing so hard at that hashtag, Second Civil War letters.
It's hilarious.
Good stuff.
So funny.
Funny. Yeah,
So
that's
funny.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, today, perhaps appropriately, we're going to talk about music in our traditions, sacred music, how we use music, how music affects our culture. I don't know. Did you want me to start, or do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Sure, definitely. You can start.
Okay, sure. Well, okay, so I'm also a musician. Some of you may not know. I make pagan and filth music. I'm not alone. There is a large overlap in that community. For those who don't know, filth music is when you, it's come to me more than that, but it started because that's when you take an existing tune and you put different lyrics to it, like Weird Al does, right? So there's a crossover in fandoms and in the Society for Creative Anachronism and a bunch of other sort of nerdy pursuits where people do that. But a lot of the people who do that also do pagan music. And this was my introduction to it. And I and my partner, Jamie Field, formerly of Parnassus, before they became Chalice and Blade, do that. So there's quite a tradition. As I mentioned in the previous episode, which was on sacred food, the more senses you bring to bear in any act of magic or ritual, the better. So obviously you want to engage the auditory senses, right? This is one of the primary ways in which we learn and comprehend things. We're visual, and then we tend to be auditory more often than not. A lot of us are very tactile too, but, you know, like that varies. It's more often, you know, visual auditory, right? And I can hear your fireworks there. That's cool. We just did that 3 days ago on Canada Day, right? But neat. So yeah, I don't know. That's not the only ones, of course. There's pagan music in any genre of music that you want to listen to. I have like a metric shit ton of CDs, and I might show some later, but only if they become relevant. I pulled them out in case they did. And what we tend to celebrate in our music is our themes of our mythology, our culture, our sabbats, our rituals, and occasionally the details of our magic or our liturgy. And you can find an amazing amount of stuff there. I ran into it for the first time when I was a Napster junkie. I never would have discovered it if I hadn't. I first discovered a goth band called Incubus Succubus that did pagan music, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's pagan music out there? And, you know, the world was open to me. And then there's a second aspect, and then that's also the chants that we teach each other in ritual and festivals and whatnot. And this is a more living folk tradition where we call them chants. They're basically little short rhyming songs with uncomplicated melodies that are easy for people to learn and repeat. And there's so much out there. I'm probably going to go into more detail about both of these things. I mentioned a lot of this in my book, The Witches They Pass the Power, and I have a video that I created to go with the book, which demonstrates, Jamie and I got together and we demonstrated a lot of common pagan chants that are associated with different parts of pagan ritual. So that's where I'm coming at it from. And I think that'll be my opening statement. And I'd love to hear more about your musical tradition.
Well, we have a lot of musical things that are completely intertwined. I think some that are very similar to what you're talking about. I am not musical traditionally. I mean, I play a couple of instruments and things like that, but I'm not known for my music. I'm known for more being a dancer. I choreograph for Dr. John McRebenack, who's a multi-Grammy winner, and I've danced for him on several occasions. And, you know, and I'm also very close with some of the other, you know, voodoo traditional bands, drummers, and things like that in the community. My priestess Bonnie Devlin has her own two CDs, one called Action of Grace, which is a ritual from beginning to end. And you know, like my priest Lou from the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, it's funny, Bonnie's my Haitian Vodou priestess, but she's a drummer, and my priest Lou from the New Orleans Voodoo Temple is also a drummer, and both of them work with special needs kids, teaching them drumming and in the school system and things like that. And that's something that I really find just so admirable and so inspiring, really, you know what I mean? Because music really does have that power to heal. And it's so important in all the traditions. And I think one of the things that unfortunately gets lost in the larger pagan community is the dedication to the drums. You know, I mentioned Bonnie Devlin, you know, she played with Olatunji, she was a sambista down in Brazil, you know, in addition to being a Haitian Vodou mambo and also a Santera, she's also a master drummer who's played with people all over the world, and she really knows her stuff, you know. And I think all the people that I value really take that time to study music theory and musicology and history of music. So it's not just this kind of djembe cowboy thing that you get a lot of times in the pagan community now, which I think is something that people don't understand. And when it comes to singing, I mean, people in Lukumi Santeria tradition, they will study for decades in order to learn the proper chants and the proper intonations. And just the way you would hire a drummer, you would hire one of these people to come and sing, or number of these people to come and sing at your events. So there's both of those aspects that you were talking about as well. There's this sort of, you know, ritual fun kind of aspect to it. And then there's also something that's very dedicated and very trained and very studied, and something that's less about, you know, momentary inspiration and more about learning what the proper sounds are to make in order to manifest different realms of spirit, which is what I think we're really talking about here. I did want to ask you though, Sable, because I have a pet peeve about this, and I won't mention any names, but people probably know who I'm talking about. I've been around pagan witchcraft, witches, for a very long time now, and I noticed maybe, I want to say about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of common chants seem to have been copyrighted by various people who, you know, whatever. The heritage or originality of some of these chants, I think, you know, is up for debate, let's just say. So I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Yeah, you know what? I actually did intend to talk about that at some point on this, so that's perfect as a lead-in. Yeah, the truth is, this is in large part a modern tradition that started probably, reclaiming contributed quite a lot to the liturgy as far as that goes, and therefore this is huge in North America. I don't think it's quite as big, the chanting aspect, in Europe, but correct me if I'm wrong, European witches, because I'm not there and I do not know what your festival tradition is like in that respect. They tend to use, to my knowledge, more folk songs and dance traditions, and there's specific dances for specific Sabbats and whatnot, which I've done some exploring with, but I'd like to know more, right? Yeah, here a lot of the chants are fairly new. They came around, you know, the 60s at the earliest, a lot of them, and a lot of the people who created them are still alive. And yeah, there was this big copywriting business a few years back, and I was very disappointed by it personally. I don't know where it started. The big thing I remember about it is that there was a particular leader in feminist witchcraft who's, you know, she's one of the founders of the tradition. She's very popular, and her work is, you know, like, I don't want to say seminal, right? But a lot of the feminist tradition of witchcraft, Dianic witchcraft, was based on her work. And in particular, she was rather incensed that somebody had taken the tune that she created for one of the most famous chants that we have in the community and rewritten it for a god perspective instead of a goddess perspective. And she viewed that as a direct front, and then of what was going on, or one of the things that led to the domino effect of that whole spat. But as a result of that, a direct result, I could not print a bunch of chants in my book. I wanted to have lyrics of chants and also, you know, a little bit of sheet music that showed you how to do them. But I was nixed on that by the publisher because of the potential copyright issues. So that is why I created the video instead to go with it. And it's fully intended to be part of the book as a result, because I couldn't address that issue. And that's depressing, because if something is going to be a folk tradition, I think that means you give it to the community, right? Like it's meant to be used and changed and adapted, and who really cares who actually started it? I've written a couple of chants in my time, and by all means, please use them. I invite you to, encourage you to, welcome you to, record them. Do, you know, you want to put it on your album, go for it. You don't have to pay me royalties. It's a tradition, and it's a folk tradition, and that matters to me. So please use them freely, right? But yeah, I share your disappointment with that whole
Well, I feel like there was a lot of, you know, without naming names, I feel like there were a lot of chants that were in common use for a very long time, and then some people all of a sudden decided to copyright them, and that's what really upset me, you know, again, because I feel like this is a shared tradition, that a lot of people's work and energy and effort and things over time went into this, and now you know, I was at a ritual and I was presented with these words that I knew these people didn't write, and I knew these people, and I was just like, this is ridiculous. I'm not singing this, you know. Whereas if we had just sung it and all knew it the way it would have been, you know, I think traditionally, you know, that would have been much greater spirit of things. You know, it's so funny. For a long time I would worry about music because, you know, traditionally you pay drummers, and sometimes some of the things I was involved in didn't necessarily have the money or the opportunity to pay people to come and drum. So there were definitely times when I would, you know, whatever, use questionable means for getting music. We'll just leave whatever that is. You can use your imagination. I'm sure it was more entertaining than you're imagining, but whatever. So, and I was wondering, you know, we just had St. John's Eve in New Orleans, and I was really worried about what we were going to do for the music. You know, I was going to my priestesses at the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, and our regular drummer wasn't going to be there because he was out of town, and you know, we were really getting a little nervous. So, and then, you know, Dr. John showed up, and him and Priestess Miriam and myself sang the entire ritual, like 3 hours. It was just beautiful, you know, with other people joining in, and then there was music from the steamboat in the background on the Mississippi, and it was just an amazing thing. And I realized in that moment that I was never going to worry about music again, that music is so deep within all of us. We can all make sound. We can all, you know, do something to express our joy and our, you know, just total honoring and respect for what it is we're doing and who we're dealing with, and the energies that we're trying to connect with and worship with, you know. So I think that really was just the whole thing with the copyright left a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. But that actually gives me an opportunity to ask you about something that I want to ask. I was at a workshop a few years back at the Canadian National Pagan Conference in Montreal. I think that was 2010, right? With Witch Dr. Utu, who is, yeah, you know the name, yeah, New Orleans voodoo priest, right? I understand he's from Toronto, so he was there.
He's from St. Catharines, actually, outside.
Oh, is he?
Oh,
yes, he is. Okay, well, there you go. Okay, fair enough. So it was really cool to have an opportunity to have him there, and he, you know, he was demonstrating some of how this is done with his group, the Dragon Ritual Drummers, who are awesome. And one thing I learned was that each of the Loa or Orisha have their own drum beat, right? And I would like to know more about that.
Oh, of course. No, I've known Witch Dr. Utu and the Dragon Ritual Drummers for, oh, let's see now, 20 plus years, I think. They're very good friends of mine. I was there when they started the Niagara Voodoo Shrine. I've, talking about some of the things I used to do. There were certainly times where they would come and participate in ceremony with me where the things that we did to get it done were less than ethical. I remember, I think we burnt the direction signs at an event once because we were cold and broke. It was like, here's a piece of wood, okay.
Nice. Yeah, he's kind of a bit of a rogue that way. He's like, no, we need to do this, so we're going to do it. Yeah, I like it. I think it's cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, there definitely are. And one of the most beautiful things, he's a member of my temple, the Voodoo Spiritual Temple down in New Orleans. And one of the wonderful things that him and Louis Martinet, the temple drummer, the author of the New Orleans Voodoo Tarot, for those of you who are familiar with the tarot cards, one of the wonderful things that they did was really go and research all the different rhythms. Louis has connections at the university in Bloomington, Indiana, and sort of use those, the ones that were in place in the temple, because the temple also does have a very strong Santeria Lukumi influence, because two of the temple drummers to begin with were Santero priests, which again, if you haven't been there for 20 years, you might not know this, but this is how this all happened. And so they really wanted to honor those traditional rhythms from Cuba, but also honor the traditional ones from New Orleans and the ones that, everybody had done. So they really worked on something that I feel is truly beautiful and truly like both honoring and respectful, but inclusive, I think, is the thing that's really beautiful about that. Uju has done all this work with the spirits of the Underground Railroad and things like that, and just really honoring all the different ancestor spirits. I just think it's so beautiful, which is a lot what I also tried to do when I was working with Dr. John, who comes from, you can't separate jazz and voodoo or hoodoo in this country, so it was so beautiful to be able to come back and dance for him and participate in, singing and the religion, on stage in front of 25,000 people. It was just beautiful. It's beautiful.
That's fantastic. Well, I was very impressed, and I was one of the things, right? I got a whole article somewhere about how I felt like very drawn to go to that conference, and I think one of the reasons was to make that particular connection, because obviously here we are, we're talking witchcraft and voodoo, and this is one of the things that made me interested in the whole voodoo and the Afro-Diasporic traditions, right? And so, cool that we have an opportunity now to talk about it in this way. I think it's really kind of neat. It was one of those things like you have in your life where you feel that different deities or, spirits are kind of going, go do this, right? That was one of the things where I felt very much like it was go do this, and weird things lined up that should not have been possible to make it happen. So it was, that was very affirming for me. It was very cool. But okay, that's off topic. But yeah, right. I thought that was just so interesting, right?
Is.
Like like there's each their own rhythm. No, go ahead. If you
I was going to say because I was like, wait a minute, I forgot my main point about that. You were asking me in the last episode about cooking, like, is there a reason for these certain things, and one of the things that Utu and Louis, when they teach the rhythms, especially for Legba, who's the guardian of the crossroads, the opener of the door, it goes 1, 2, 3, and they say that those are his 2 footsteps, and then his cane as it touches the earth. And some people view his cane being like his phallus, which is having sex with the earth. Louis likes to say it's because he's so old that it's fallen off and now he has to hold it so he doesn't lose it.
That's hilarious.
I know.
Cool.
I just love that.
Cool. No, that's fun. That's neat. I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, but just that each of the rhythms mimic the character of the Orisha or the Loa that they're dealing with, which I think is beautiful. I mean, do you find that in Wicca too? Like, do the chants, like, whatever, musically match up to some of the numbers or the correspondences that you would think would go with the goddesses?
Yes, I do find that. I think that there is, music is one of the things where we engage with it almost entirely with our sensing, feeling aspects, right? There is an intellectual component, but we feel it more than we think about it, right? And I think that, probably it's just a natural result of that. But yes, if the song is about, I don't know, if the song is about Hecate, right? Because she tends to be seen as a dark goddess that has death and crossroads associations in Wicca, right? It tends to be, you know, powerful and dirge-like or rhythmic, right? It's got a lot of that, you know, I am this powerful dark goddess, and there's a part of me that's a little scary going on there, and that's very cool. But if you're listening to stuff about, say, you know, the moon goddess Selene, right? It's more, you know, it's very peaceful. The rhythm is long. The notes soar, you know, right? Stuff about Bridget tends to have a lot of creative and fiery energy to it. Yeah, I definitely see that. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. I love finding these commonalities. This is one of my fun things when we do this show, you know, that there's definitely this crossover and in between things and stuff like that. And I really appreciate that. Just want to say
Me
that.
too.
Yeah.
Or things that evolve that way because this is something that's innate to the human condition, which is awesome too. Yeah, I love that. I also love finding commonalities between faiths and traditions for that, you know, that reason as well. So, yeah, big for me too.
Do you have rituals that you do with your instruments? I know that for a few times, like, you know, Lewis and Utu have done things where there's a ceremony that we do where we send the drums back to Africa. So you kind of like make a little bed for them and you put them to sleep, and then you give them some food and some drink, and then you just sort of sing and you know, chant for them while they go back to Africa, and then they come back again and you wake them up and then you play them again. Like, which I always thought was one of the most beautiful things. Yeah, it's a beautiful ceremony. We haven't done it for a while. Well, I don't know if he has done it, but I haven't done it in a while.
This is another one of those things where people tend to be pretty eclectic. There isn't a lot of established tradition, but in my experience, a lot of pagan musicians for whom music is an active and important part of their practice do have things where they, you know, they'll bless their instruments, they'll, you know, store them with very much, you know, care, like the little bed, right? But some even have done the little bed. I don't know if they stole that, but you know, that's I've seen that before. It's not common, but I have known people who've done that, right? They'll usually decorate them in ways that invoke sacred symbolism. Drums in particular tend to be painted a lot to do that. Must be some firework display out there. That's cool. Speaking of rhythm, but
yes, lots of fireworks.
Oh, that's great. That's cool. You know, so yeah, you know, we do tend to do that, right? I know that Norse pagan traditions have something they call disting, which they do around the time of the Imbolc Sabbath, right? And that's a time where you bless the tools of your profession. So musicians will get their instruments blessed, you know. I wanted to go to one because I want to get my computer blessed for my writing. It just hasn't worked out for me so far, but
it's great.
Yeah, you know, so yeah, we do that. And I think just about all of us believe that each instrument has its own personality, character, and spirit in it, just like any other sacred object, right? So, yeah. We use rhythm too, not in as organized a way as you do. We use, like you said, this drum or djembe cowboy gathering. We do that a lot, right? But there's, you know, like I don't know if I want to be dismissive of it. I mean, it isn't nearly as detailed or involved or, you know, practiced and skilled, right, as the traditions that you guys do, but it can be really something to kind of get together in a drum circle and everybody kind of free form rhythms, and you've got to be aware of each other's energy and anticipate how each other feels, and so you make that connection which is made in ritual to a common purpose, right? And then you can, you know, if you want, and often we do, you can use that energy to invoke a spell or just give it an offering to the universe, which is often done at Sabbaths, right? People will dance. You know, there's a lot of belly dancing that goes on in particular. I went to this great workshop where this woman was teaching goddess dance, which was, she had studied professional belly dancing in two different traditions, a folk tradition and the more common one that are commonly familiar one in North America, which is more showy, right, and less traditional, right? And she puts elements of that together to do sort of goddess interpretive dance, and it involved making lunar crescents with your hips and, you know, neat stuff. It was really awesome. And I've also done ritual that has been entirely in music. I've done that on a couple of different occasions. One was specifically oriented to use, you know, because you've got a chant for every part of a Wiccan ritual, right? Like, I broke down the ritual structure. It took me way too long to talk about it, but I just watched it recently, so I know. But each part of the ritual has at least a few chants associated with it that you can do for that part of the ritual. And every Sabbath has chants for it. Every, you know, different moon phase has chants. Most of the deities you work with will have chants that have been established. There's stuff for just god and goddess chants, right? There's gratitude chants, right? Or you can make your own, right? And that's the other thing. If you have a modicum of a feel for music and you used to sing little song rhymes to yourself as a child, this is the kind of skill you need to make chants, and they can be really effective. So I encourage people to do that and explore that. But I've also heard people do it as performance art. There's one group I know did an entire sequence to a song by Kate Bush. I forget what it's called, but the lyrics are recreating the Lesser Banishing Ritual of Pentagram, which is a ritual magic thing, but a lot of Wiccan traditions do it, right? And they did a whole performance art sequence to that song, right? I've done this too, where I've used recorded pagan music as different stages of a ritual and then did performance art along with it. So there's so many different things that can be done. We could talk for a long time. I don't know if you want
to. No, I think you're right. There is a lot that can be done, and there is a lot that sort of, you know, combines these other elements. You know, you were talking about putting sigils and things like that on instruments. I know there are a lot of Haitian drummers that, even if they don't necessarily actively practice Vodou, they will put Veve symbols on their drums. I just did an event last weekend where that happened, you know. So it's interesting to me that different elements, especially where the music is concerned, seem to be mainstays despite other things, you know. So I think that that's an important thing to think about, you know, especially if you are thinking about picking up an instrument or thinking about doing some kind of ritual music, you know, just what kind of blessing you're going to do on the instrument, what kind of, you know, energy you're just going to surround it with. You know, I think that's why I think the ritual I was talking about is so beautiful, because it really does involve sort of waking up the ashe or energy of the drum, you know. We should do it for everything, but we don't. But
what I think is cool is that in both our traditions, I think it would be safe to say, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the music is an integral part of the practice. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely, I would agree. You know, I think that, and I think you're right about saying that everybody, you know, can, you know, has some sort of affinity for that kind of thing, even if it's very simple. You know what I mean? The talents you had as a kid, those kinds of rhyming talents, or you know, we do a chant. None of my godkids are particularly musical. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, but we can sing, you know, so not with instruments, but we have voices. So I adapted a traditional New Orleans, you know, jazz tune in order for us to sing, to open our rituals. And it's worked out really well. I think it's great, you know, because that way I can, and we did it at Pagan Pride last year, you know, it's like something people can relate to, something that can move people, you know, and it really allows them to sort of just take those first steps down the road to something magical happening, you know. And I know if we were there and we had no music, forget it, we would have been lost. I just would have been another ridiculous looking person in the middle of a parking lot yelling loudly, you know. So this way it just sort of, you know, pulls focus, as they say, since I'm a theater person, you know, it pulls everybody's focus and it allows everybody to literally harmonize and get together and work together and sort of, you know, just hone in on their goals, whatever
Well,
that is.
Sure, music is another one of those things like food that we create in community, and it's very easy to get a large number of people involved. When we're doing public ritual, we usually bring a couple of good solid drums to provide a basic beat to people to chant to. And there's always a couple people who don't feel comfortable singing, even in a large group chant. I try to tell them, you know, you can't sound bad. There's, you know, it all tones together. Even if you're way off key, it will probably blend. So don't be afraid, but there's always someone who is. So we have a lot of little rattles and things that we bring. You know, I made a couple of little boards and stuff like that. I painted it with symbols, and, you know, I bring them and I say, okay, we'll shake this, you know, right? And this also works well if you're going to do anything that involves movement, like say you're going to do a spiral dance, which is something that a lot of different Wiccan and pagan traditions do, right? Then there's always people who are, you know, they don't have as good mobility. So how do you include them, right? Well, you know, drumming or, you know, chanting or, you know, shaking rattles. This is a great way to do that, you know, most people can do in some way. Right now, if you can't, I can find other ways to do that too. I've had friends with cerebral palsy who've been at rituals, and, you know, so we just kind of wheeled her into the center of things as she was the center of the spiral, and it was fantastic. She had a great time, and so did we, right? So, yeah, there's so many things that you can do to just get everybody involved, and I think that's one of the reasons why we use it. And I also think it's one of the reasons why a lot of different faiths use it. Like, I don't know, the only faith I know that tends to not use it is those who believe that there's something dangerous about singing and dancing. And, you know, they're the exception, they're not the rule. You know, everybody's got their own music tradition. Sometimes it's for stillness and sometimes it's for movement, but either way, right, it's always there, and there's always sacred songs, right?
No, I agree, you know, and I feel the same way about it. I mean, we have shakers and other instruments that we do if we're doing a large public ritual, and I love to give them to, you know, the kids who don't necessarily know what's happening or don't want to stand still in that moment, you know, and I think that's part of the responsibility of a good priest or priestess, making sure that there's something there for everyone to participate. And music is one of the, you know, again, simplest but most divine ways to do that. You know, somebody can feel really strong and empowered by making a joyful sound, as I have fireworks going off.
Yeah, fireworks are cool. I like fireworks. We do fireworks too, of course. So yeah, I missed the fireworks this year. I was disappointed. No, that's cool. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, that's what I was going to say. I don't think I was going to say anything else.
Okay. Okay. There's also, I wanna touch on something else too, right? Because I'm trying to, when you're talking about, okay, this is what we do in Wicca, right? Wicca is a pretty broad umbrella. So I don't want to leave people out, and I don't want to ever suggest that the way I do it is the only way to do things, right? There's so many different variations. I can't really speak for everybody, but I'm trying to represent as many of the different streams as I'm aware of in some way, right? When I know something about it. Okay, so in the European tradition, right, you know, British traditional witchcraft and whatnot, more often the musical tradition there, rather than what we would call chanting, is folk songs that are, you know, English or Celtic folk songs, right? And also the Norse pagans have a folk music tradition as well, which I love. I love their music. I think it's awesome. It's so moving and powerful. But, you know, like they'll do things like they all know the lyrics to Oak and Ash and Thorn, right? And then they'll sing that at midsummer while they do a dance to it. And there is debate among scholars whether these things are signs of a surviving pagan tradition from pre-Christian era, or whether the modern pagans kind of recreated a pagan tradition by borrowing from the folk songs. And I think there's a good argument for either, and I'm not going to weigh in on that. But either way, there's, like it's everywhere. And a lot of that stuff is hidden in songs that are commonly sung by everybody at festival times and in taverns and whatever else, right? So you can get that, and I think that's cool. And I've tried to incorporate some of that sometimes in rituals here, but we're more used to chanting and it's difficult. But I think it can be awesome, right? And another thing, right? Popular music is something I wanted to talk about. I think that a lot more of these aspects of our traditions leak into popular music than people think. And I really personally enjoy listening to something that is, a song you hear on the radio and go, I know what that's really about, right? So do you find that a lot? There's a lot of songs out there that mention voodoo and hoodoo, but do they have any kind of real origin in them, or do you think, or is this just an accident?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on who you're talking about. You know what I mean? I think that it's varying levels of things all the way along. That was one of the beautiful things working for Dr. John, because he really is a practitioner. And we could talk about the religion. We could talk about what spell was going to be hidden underneath this song and things like that when we were on stage. It was like, whatever you do, we got to get the president. I'm like, okay, things like that. Oh, that's great. All right. I'm on board with yeah, okay. So that was really nice. And that was really beautiful, and I think that you can definitely see, it's funny because a lot of my godkids are, my daughter's age, so, 20 years younger than me. So they've come to a lot of these things, not with Celia Cruz and Carlos Santana, who would be traditionally what people would think of these things, but with groups like Oshun and Ibiye and, the more, I just heard an Ibiye song in Queen Sugar the other day, you know what I mean? It's definitely seeped into popular culture. And I think that's beautiful because I think in order for them to do such lovely, fantastic, honoring, respectful songs and to present that to a way that it gets all over the television, all out there in the media, is something that we need, something that we really, really need. And I really respect that. I mean, I'm not talking about these things that are cultural appropriators. I heard something the other day that Debbie Harry's got a song that's a tribute to Papa Legba, and Elton John has one too. I mean, so I'm like, wait a minute, and they both of them put these out, I think, in the 70s or the early 80s, and that's different than, just to make a distinction for you music people out there, that's different than I feel about somebody like David Byrne, who actually did participate in voodoo ceremonies, has some sort of affinity connection to Haitian Vodou, which I always felt like he was, being way more respectful, or even some of the Haitian groups that also use a lot of Vodou, symbolism, like Boukman Experience or something like that. So that's different to me than what I'm talking about here with Debbie Harry and Elton John. But I mean, if Debbie Harry wants to come to my house and prove to me she's a voodoo practitioner, that's fine. But otherwise, I think maybe Blondie should stick to what she does best. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not in disagreement, and I've seen the same kind of thing, right? Like, I don't know. Every couple of years, there's always some big popular artist, usually an outspoken female diva type. I wonder why, that tends to get accused of being a witch, right? And sometimes they are. Sometimes I can listen to their music and I can look at what they're doing and I'm like, yeah, that's clearly Wicca influenced. I recognize that influence. So yeah, she probably is, right? Of course, they all, and this goes back ages, but this goes back to at least the 60s that I am aware of, where a lot of practitioners will put some elements of what they're doing into their music. I mentioned Kate Bush, right? There's it was never confirmed, but why can I not remember her name? I feel like an idiot. I love her music. She's amazing. I listen to her all the time. She was the lead singer of Fleetwood Mac. Help me out here.
Stevie Nicks.
Thank you, Stevie Nicks, right?
You're talking about Stevie Nicks? Okay.
I know, yeah, I'm talking about Stevie Nicks. She's, famously been accused of being a witch, right? I think she is, right? I listen to her music and I'm like, yeah, okay, I know what she's talking about. She's talking about the goddess there. She's talking about initiation here. I recognize the themes, right? So at least she's had some influence, right? So, but of course she has to deny it, right? Because, that's the end of your career still as a pop musician. Like, what the hell? But but then like you say, there are those who obviously have borrowed stuff and clearly don't know what the hell they're talking about, and that pisses me off. And it pisses me off not because I care, not because I'm offended in the maybe I don't know, right? Like I'm not offended that they want to celebrate these things, right? That's okay with me, right? Paganism kind of welcomes everybody, right? But I'm pissed off because they're not, right? They're not celebrating paganism. They're like, this sounds cool and it's a fun song. And what they usually end up doing is perpetuating negative stereotypes, which makes me angry. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a popular opinion, but in a way, that's kind of how I feel about Beyonce and all of this recent stuff where she's, putting on Oshun type, clothes and atmosphere and things like that, but is stopping short of coming out and saying, this is a wonderful, beautiful religion, and here's my teacher, and this is how we should study. You know what I mean? It's more of something that just seems like a temporary thing, and that makes me sad. I really want to stand behind her. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn. Like, I can't say anything bad about Beyonce, but I really wish that she did more for the community, because we do need people to come. This is not, the 60s or the 50s or the 40s or whatever. And even then we had people that were coming out and saying that they were doing these things, and not in a bad way necessarily, in a positive way. That's what I love about Dr. John. He managed to come out without demonizing about it. You know what I mean? It just adds to the mystique of his character and the wonderful person that he really is. I mean, he doesn't give huge interviews about it, but it's still something that he acknowledges as part of his character. And I think that's what is necessary if you're going to be respectful about this. You know what I mean? How can you sing these songs to the Orisha or the Loa without really acknowledging that this is part of what you do? But then again, Celia Cruz did the same thing. I mean, people claim she's a Yemaya, but she never 100% said it. People say the same thing about J-Lo. I mean, who knows? I want everyone to come out. There we go. I said it on the record.
There you go.
If you're a millionaire and you're practicing some sort of alternative spirituality, please come out and help us out, because you're a millionaire, and even if it costs you a couple of fans, you're a millionaire, and I think you might be okay.
Yeah, and then the rest of us poor working slobs who keep getting kicked out of the hall we're trying to rent for ritual might actually be able to rent it. Yeah. Yeah. I wish the same thing. I really do. I don't want to push, like, if you really are in a position where it's dangerous, okay, right? That's part of our Wicca myth too, right?
Sure.
But, I think if more prominent people who are practicing were to come out, this would help everybody. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think, it's 2018 now? I mean, I think that there's at least space for these things. I mentioned Beyonce. You take the other side of it, you got Azealia Banks. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everything Azealia Banks did, but I'm happy that she did come out as a practitioner of African traditional religion. And for every weird thing in her closet she shows, she makes an equally positive statement about, I should be able to, do what I want to with my food, the same way that Kentucky Fried Chicken does what they want to with their food. You know what I mean? Like that, if I'm using it for ritual purposes, then who are you to say something about it? You know what I mean? So I think that she actually came out and took a stand is something that's really promising to me, and I wish more people did.
Yeah, that's cool. I agree with you. That is awesome. And yeah, I wish more people did too. Yeah. All right, so back to music.
Yay, music.
Yeah. Do you guys have any tradition of using sound in healing work? Because this is something we've been known to do.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of times where people will, on both sides of the thing. I mentioned that, if somebody is ill, you might have the same kind of ceremony that I was talking about with like putting them to sleep with the drums, in the same way of like, you know, having them coucher or rest with the drums or spend time with the drums in a sort of healing way. And then there's also times, you know, there's times when I've done rituals where people who had chronic back pain were, you know, possessed, trance, whatever you want to call it, leaping around, dancing, feeling no pain, all of these things. So, you know, on both ends of the spectrum, there are times when the healing can take place with music in a very kind of still place. And then there's times when it can take place in a really energetic kind of place. And I think that, you know, my priestess Miriam, she used to, she's got a medical background. She worked in a hospital for, I think it was a decade, you know, and she likes to say that all magic is healing magic. And I think that's a really wise way of thinking about it, because, you know, if we step into ritual, maybe we need to heal our hearts, maybe we need to heal our minds, maybe we need to heal our pocketbook, you know, like maybe that it's all, we can all think of it as healing. So that being in contact with these sacred songs, being in contact with the drums, being in contact with the music, all of these things together, you know, that's something that is a healing force for people. And it's not just drums. I realize I've been saying drums a lot and singing a lot, but there's also, you know, among Haitian practitioners, when you get the mambo initiation, one of the things you get is a ritual rattle called an assan. Now, originally, traditionally, it was, you know, who knows, I have heard, I will say, qualify this, I have heard that it was supposed to have the bones of your enemies on it, which I think that's some stuff right there. Right now, it usually just has beads, or sometimes people have snake vertebrae or something like that on it, and it's a gourd rattle. So you have something that is literally there to, you know, honor, summon, petition, you know, give tribute to the spirits that you get when you get to that level of initiation. So there is other elements of sound in play, just in case anybody thought I forgot about that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you're not alone if that is the real tradition, right? Like there's all kinds of things like that in different cultures all over the world. So, you know, I've heard of skulls being used as percussion instruments in Celtic traditions. So, you know, can't speak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a thing, right? There's a particular type of flute that originally in Tibetan Buddhism was made from thigh bones, right? I'd actually really like to know what that sounds like. And my personal opinion is if somebody gave up their body and said, yeah, go ahead and do that for that purpose, it's nobody else's business to judge that. So, you know, I'd love to hear that sometime. But okay, yeah, that's cool, right? Wicca borrows a lot from Western occult traditions. Western occult traditions can have some really complex healing stuff with sound. But we also borrow from more traditional indigenous meditation work, right? Heartbeat drumming, you know, you drum at a heart beat, and then you want to introduce, you're nodding, you know, right? You want to induce a meditative state. You can slow it gradually, and you'll find generally that most people will relax and their heartbeat will start to slow as well as they get attuned to the drum, right? So we do that. There's also a complex tradition of different musical notes being associated with different chakras. So, you know, I don't remember what they are at the moment. I got a book, right, that I've it was in this condition when I got it, but actually it's pretty useful. This isn't really written for witches.
Interesting.
Yeah, Sacred Sounds, Ted Andrews. It's not written for witches in particular. It's for anybody who wants to do sound healing work. But there's a detailed like image there. Yeah, there we go. That shows different musical notes associated with the different chakras and the different type of instruments. So you can get this complex, right? Also, these musical notes are all, because they're associated with different chakras, associated with different planetary energies, so you can invoke all of that into it if you really want to get elaborate, and some people do, right? And I've gone as far as looking for songs in particular keys to play in the background when I'm trying to deal with a particular thing that's associated with that chakra, right? But I haven't done a lot of that otherwise because it can get really complicated. There's also this whole thing I don't know. I did some work on it for my book, right? And I don't really know. I think it comes from New Age influence, but not everything they do is you know, stuff that you can't use, right? And this this aspect is about using different frequencies. They're called solfeggio frequencies. Apparently, at one time, this was like a competitor to the current musical scale, the 7-note scale that we're familiar with. And it was basically, you know, different. So it's similar to musical notes, but it's not quite the same, right? And each one of those is associated with a different healing purpose. And then I've used that along with brainwave entrainment work to create music that was associated, like I composed an album of meditation music that was all associated with the different elements, right? So I've done some work with that, and that's, I love it. I think that's a lot of fun. You can find playlists on YouTube that go on for days. So I'll link a lot of this stuff in the description. I'm the one that's posting this video, so there will be all kinds of resources listed in the description, and a few in those little gray card banners that appear across the top of the screen as well, to link you to some of these resources if this is stuff you're interested in. But yeah, so it can be complicated, but it can also be simple, I guess, is ultimately my point that I was getting to there.
No, you didn't lose me. I'm here.
Okay, no, that's cool. I know it's pretty late for you, and you know, I've been enjoying watching the fireworks flash on your face. It must really be pretty. You must have a great view there. That's
right?
so cool.
Yeah, it's a party here. Yeah. Definitely, definitely. No, I think that's fascinating. It really is. It really is. You know, I don't know if I fully explained it, but one of the things that you do with the rattle is that then that can be used like for individual healings. You know, yes, it gets used in ritual, but then like if you're around someone who needs to be healed in the immediate, then you always have your sacred, you know, song with you, and you can do that. So
that's cool. That's
yeah.
something that we should think about, you know, adapting our, you know, not to appropriate, but adapting a variation of, because that's cool. Like, then you're always prepared, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it definitely comes in handy, you know, like any ritual tool, but it just serves as this kind of ancestral ritual tool because it's a gourd, because it's usually also filled with crystals and stones and herbs and things like that that are specific to you and your powers and your path, that then that becomes, you know, something you can then go and use for the community. So it's sort of like a connection between your ancestors and also the people that you're dealing with and trying to help in this realm.
I get that completely. We rarely invest that kind of energy into rattles, but we have been known to do it with drums, and we tend to use it with a lot of the basic Wiccan ritual altar tools, right? Particularly our Othame, right? We tend to invest with a lot of that kind of energy. So I understand completely what you're talking about, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. But yes, there's a lot to learn. Let me just say that. And it's very complicated, you know. And but again, it's ever evolving, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about it. You know, I mentioned the newer music, there's the older music, there's efforts by people to sort of combine the two and still find a place for us to all grow and move forward.
Absolutely. And I think that's the ultimate purpose of the use of sacred music in ritual, is to bring everybody together and, you know, create a commonality of purpose, and either celebrate being together in community or focus your attention towards a particular thing, whether that's celebrating midsummer or, you know, maybe doing magic for change in, you know, change in the world, right? Yeah. Cool.
Definitely. Is there anything else about music?
I think I've about exhausted my particular, yeah.
I'm sure I'll think of something when we're done, like I always do.
Oh, I always do too. Oh, right. There's one brief thing I will mention. Sometimes pagan musicians will create new music to teach mythology in a musical form, right? And I love that kind of thing. It's not as common as chanting or the use of folk songs, but it's pretty cool. Like it's out there. Like I've got, like I said, I grabbed like a stack of books and CDs, but this one in particular is a good example of that. Right?
Oh, nice.
Wait, no, can you see it? There we go.
Yeah, now I can see it.
Bard's Book of Pagan Songs by Hugin the Bard. This is a retelling of the Mabinogion, right? So that's, I didn't know anything really about the Mabinogion until I found this, and this was one of the ways in which I learned it, right? And also adapting liturgy. How I learned to memorize the Witch's Rune was I listened to a song by a group called Spiral Dance who had set it to music, and I found it much easier to memorize, and I have used their variation in ritual because I think it's very effective. Yeah, and that's it. That was the last thing I had to say.
Oh, well, good, because I remembered something, so this is good.
Oh, great.
There's also been times, you know, I mentioned this kind of like sort of constant struggle with music. There's also been times when I incorporated pop music into things that we were doing, especially for public ritual, because I think for a lot of people, they have a reference for that. You know, we did a silent rave where we did Michael Jackson's Thriller. It was great. It was fantastic. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, you know, and there's been other times where we'd incorporate rap chants into pieces of it or something, because this is things that people understand. You know, my good friend and our editor, Jason Mankey, I know he's fun. He does a Jim Morrison ritual that's really crazy cool that I really love, you know. Yeah. So
I've heard of his Jim Morrison ritual. I would love to be at that sometime. I was going to go to Patheos one year, and it did not work out. My mom had some health issues, and I didn't make it, and I ended up like canceling at the last minute and flaking, and now I don't know if they're going to have me back.
Oh no.
Yeah, but it was, you know, like he did it there at that one.
Oh,
and
nice.
I was like so disappointed that I didn't get to go, you know, because everybody's telling me about it. So cool. And actually, you know, Jason is a good person to mention because his whole thing is paganism and rock and roll, right? Like that's his original blog before he became our editor. That's what it's all about. It's called Raise the Horns. And he talks about what he calls witch rock. Yeah, exactly. He talks about witch rock, which is sort of a particular pseudo-occult or folk acid rock kind of sounding thing is what he tends to qualify as that. So if you're looking for ways in which Wicca and occult themes have crept into popular music in the past or at present, he wrote a couple of really great articles about that. I will try to find them and link them, but I make no promises. I might just end up linking his blog. We'll have to see how my Google foo is, but I'll try.
I just saw him in New Orleans, and I have to say this because we're almost ending. He's also going to be at Hex Fest, and so's Witch Dr. Utu this year. So, like, if anybody wants to see me and Utu and Jason Mankey, we're all going to be in the same. It'll be like the hair wars because they have hair wars, and I tell them I have better hair than both of them. So, you got some nice hair too, Sable. See.
I'll come play hair wars.
Right, you can join in our hair wars.
You have beautiful hair. I love your hair. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, well, like, who does the best braids and, you know.
Yeah. No,
and who makes the biggest, hair. You know. Yeah, that's cool. That's so cool. I'm so glad you guys get, well, hi, I hope you have a great time. I wish I was going, you know. That's so cool.
Thank you. We will raise a glass to you. Yes,
Thank you. That's cool. Yes. I will be with you in spirit. So that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're at about the end, are we? Have we remembered anything else? Okay,
no.
So perfect. Thanks for joining us again for Witchcraft and Voodoo. We will see you again in a couple of weeks. If anybody can remember the topics that we said we were going to do, I wrote it down somewhere, but I've lost the piece of paper, so please make it in the comment if there's something you wanted to see so we can be reminded and damn well do it, okay?
Yeah, and subscribe to the channels.
Yeah, that's right. Subscribe to our channels. Subscribe to the playlist. Bye.
Yes, bye. Where did I go?